For our first keynote, please welcome Stacy Mahler. She will present her thoughts on innovation for sustainability, navigating change and building resilience. Stacy is head of sustainability for Siemens Smart Infrastructure in the US and is responsible for supporting customers on their sustainability journey through infrastructure enhancements that improve energy efficiency, integrate renewable energy, and enable electrification. She also manages the carbon reduction roadmap for Siemens' smart infrastructure footprint in the US in alignment with their global sustainability goals and commitments. She holds a degree in electrical engineering from the University of Florida, an MBA from Northwestern University, and has over 15 years of experience in the industrial and energy sectors. Welcome, Stacy.
Well, thank you for having me here today. First and foremost, this is just really, part of what's important to me in my daily life, just the Edge in Tech initiative. And, as a girl growing up wanting to be an engineer since I can remember, and eventually going through electrical engineering, I think this is just such an important initiative. And then, of course, the topic around resilient infrastructure just brings everything, full circle for me, and really pleased and honored to be able to speak to the group here today. Going to talk about innovation for sustainability. That's what I do it day in, day out, sustainability. But, we also talk about resiliency as a strong complement there. And so, if we're navigating all of the different socioeconomic, infrastructure, legislative, technology changes in order to really get to an end goal, which is a more resilient, more sustainable world. So really just to start off, and I see my job here is to set the table for what's going to be a really, thought-provoking, interesting, hopefully energizing conference for all of the participants. And so my job is to just get you rallied up and get everybody, get kind of the table set and get everybody level set going in. And so how are we defining that mission and that challenge? And when we talk about sustainability, every time I go to an organization and talk about their sustainability objectives, what work they're doing, what's important to them, it really runs the gamut. I hear the word resilience. I hear future-proofing, efficiency, climate-friendly, emissions reduction. I hear sustainability in terms of economic and business sustainability, but it has to be robust, reliable. And so how are we really thinking about what does sustainability mean? What does resiliency mean? And it really is, if you go back to the core, sustainability is ensuring that resources are available for the long term. So what does that mean? That means everything from the materials that we use, water, energy, natural resources, people resources. These are all things that we want to conserve, to protect, to multiply. And then when we think about resiliency, it's a natural complement. It's really the ability to withstand shocks and disruptions to a system. So you're trying to maintain sustainability by creating a system that is resilient to those different shocks, stresses, changes. And those can be anything from major weather events to a global pandemic. It could be something like a cyber attack. So these can be natural, man-made, and really, again, bringing those two things together. Our mission here is how do we create a sustainable world that is able to withstand these types of pressures and can adapt to changes that are naturally going to occur in our world. So, when initially talking about, my participation in the conference, we talked a lot about technology, and specifically the infrastructure pieces that I deal with on a daily basis. And so just to kind of share some insights there on some of the key themes that we see, and we're going to talk about some nuance here, but there's a lot of deep dive sessions to hear today on things like advanced manufacturing. You guys are going to talk about the future of transportation, of aviation. And so these themes kind of all come into play. But what we see is an increasing move for electrification. that can be transportation, that's building electrification, manufacturing process electrification. And so what does that mean? That means that you have to have capacity in order to support that. You have to have a modern grid that can withstand additional stress on the system. The power that you are using to supply this increased load. We have this kind of parallel path of energy transition from coal and gas over to cleaner energies. And so making sure that as we're trying to build up this electrified infrastructure, we're increasing capacity, we're putting additional stress, we're trying to transition the sources of our electricity at the same time to be sources that can be reliable, resilient. And so you kind of see these this dichotomy, or these friends of sustainability and resiliency really coming into play. And it's a challenge to manage those things in parallel as fast as possible, as resilient as possible, to get to where we need to go within a somewhat of a finite time frame, if we're looking at a 2050 target. Then on kind of the parallel path, you see advanced materials coming into play. There are some challenges there of how do you use that within existing infrastructure. So being able to retrofit existing infrastructure is becoming really important. Big theme around digitalization. So with things like electrification, advanced manufacturing, all of this comes down to the ability to understand what's happening in your system, the ability to respond, to control, to communicate within that system. And so digitalization of, again, what in a lot of cases is somewhat of an older infrastructure in a lot of places, can be challenging at times. So we have this retrofit dynamic in play. And then kind of thinking about just overall, again, the trade-offs within this system. So when we look at, electrification of a transportation system, we think about, do we need distributed energy or do we use grid? How does that affect the transmission capability? How does that affect capacity needs? And then making sure that we're able to deploy that in a way that provides equitable access to all of these resources. So a lot of key themes, a lot of interdependency between the key themes. And I think as you start to explore later in the symposium and you explore these individual technology areas, be thinking about interdependency, be thinking about acceleration in the face of those interdependencies, and how do we collaborate in order to make sure we're all moving forward together. And so the challenge with this, and I touched on a couple of them, is you do have some interdependency between different technology areas. You're operating in this really truly interdependent infrastructure ecosystem, and being able to innovate with regard to and with consideration of other pieces of that ecosystem is really critical. We're also trying to innovate and move forward while thinking about or considering reduction in resources, resource scarcity, alternative resources or alternative materials. So again, we kind of have this push and pull dynamic that really creates a challenge. We want equitable access to everything that we're doing. When I talk to organizations, the biggest challenge is how to plan for the future and how to finance that future infrastructure while also meeting today's business needs. So there's a conflict in how do I produce for my customers today at a price that is reasonable, manageable, affordable, while also investing into my infrastructure, often with technologies that haven't yet been scaled, or fully scaled or fully price optimized, and be able to kind of move the needle to get to this tipping point where that technology is fully scaled and is fully, the cost reductions are fully realized, optimized. So those again, when you think about technology innovation, think about scale fast. That's really going to be critical for organizations that need to want to adopt this technology while also managing the concerns of today and the imperatives of today. In addition, we talked about change. So we have climate change, we have infrastructure change, technology change. We also have stakeholder change. The financial sector, financing requirements, consumer pressure, employee expectations within organizations are really also driving what businesses need to do, and the rate and the type of technology that will get adopted. And so when we think about how do we get there, there's a lot of push and pull, there's a lot of interdependency, there's a lot of potentially conflicting priorities, but that also presents an opportunity for people like those, all of you attending the symposium today. And that's really to bring together that ecosystem and be the answer to the challenge and be the solution to some of the challenges that you see up here. And so kind of closing, and again, really just to get everybody motivated on how to listen and take this back to your everyday in a way that allows you to truly affect change. We think about the how do we solve the challenge? And it really does require everyone. And that's why initiatives like Edge and Tech are so critical. Reaching in, reaching out becomes extremely important. The first piece is really ownership of that challenge. And that is bringing home whatever it is that your day-to-day is. And within Siemens, we talk about sustainability is everyone's job. Whether you're in supply chain, whether you're in finance, whether you're in engineering, there's a lot of people that come to us saying, well, I went on Indeed and searched sustainability, and I'm looking for a job in sustainability, and there's not a lot out there. In Siemens, everyone's job is sustainability, and you'll find that in most companies that are moving forward. It really is making sustainability your role and having a sustainability mindset in everything that you do. So really that ownership culture, that ownership mindset of incorporating those values into how you do what you do. The second piece is collaboration. And this one it's the second one here on the slide. Quite frankly, it's the most important. Again, you have this very complex ecosystem that is highly interdependent on each other. And I would say even within those pockets of the ecosystem, there's interdependencies, there's different players. Within the building space, we often talk about how architects talking with contractors, talking with materials manufacturers, talking with technology manufacturers, how much could we accelerate and how much could we innovate if we got all of those people consistently talking together? And the reality is that a lot of times those stakeholders operate in silos or operate according to a specific workflow. So again, thinking about how can you contribute, how can you really be part of that change and answer that challenge? And it's reaching across, reaching in. We talk with universities, the importance of the College of Engineering, talking to the College of Business, talking to the College of Design, and really starting to understand those interdependencies and how you truly bring something to bear. And then the third is really persistence. And this is what everybody in this symposium is doing today. It's continue learning, continue innovating. The climate space, the resiliency space, it's highly disruptive. And thank goodness, because that's the way that we continue to move forward and innovate. It also presents a ton of opportunity, and it presents a lot of opportunity for groups not traditionally well represented within the tech sector. So this is a space where demand far exceeds supply in terms of talent and resources. And so jump in and be persistent, continue learning. Those that kind of stay on top of the technology, the trends, that are able to speak to different pieces of the ecosystem, that are able to collaborate, really bring a ton of value in this space. And those are going to be the people that move us forward. And Camille, with that, I will kick it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. If you have just a minute, maybe we could have just a couple questions. And I'll remind the audience to please enter your questions in the Q&A box. It was really great to hear your remarks and learn more about Siemens and your work in a variety of fields. I really loved your succinct definition of resilience, of making sure resources will be available for the long term. I think that's a good way to think about it. And I also loved your closing comment about ownership, collaboration, and persistence being necessary for sustainability, but those words can be just as true for all our diversity and inclusion efforts too. It requires all of those things. So thinking about your own career path, I know we have a number of students on the line today. I wonder if you want to make a few comments or words of advice about what you would say to students who are maybe thinking about a career in engineering or about to embark on a career in engineering. What would you recommend?
Absolutely. And so my career path is actually pretty interesting. I came up through high school and college wanting to be an electrical engineer, completed all my internships in that field. And by the end of that, really decided that I wanted to work not necessarily in design or in applications engineering, but wanted to be more on how do I support customers in accelerating adoption of technology and communicating new technology. And so I went more into the technical marketing and sales field. Through that, have moved through went from communications, mobile communication sector, over to manufacturing technology, into power generation at the time that, decarbonization really started taking flight, and thinking about different fuel strategies, carbon capture, carbon mitigation within this traditionally fossil-based infrastructure, and then moved over into kind of back and pulled all those pieces together into infrastructure where I'm at right now, focused on sustainability, which really is a critical imperative for us. So I think if you're beginning your career, try not to map it out too clearly. Understand what your values are. Understand what you want, what gives you energy. And so for me, again, it was working with the implementation of technology, that working with helping a customer solve how they were going to implement technology, or how to solve a problem, and using the technology that our company provided. That was where I got my energy. That could be different for you, and lean into that. Don't worry so much about, the company name or the product type or some of these things that you tend to get, unless that's part of your passion. But, I think I came out of college having a very specific path in mind that I wanted to follow. And I can tell you, I have not followed that path, and I could not be happier in the work that I do today. I'm extremely fulfilled. So follow that passion, those values, stay connected to everybody that's in your classes today. I still talk frequently with several people from my electrical engineering program. They're going to be the innovators and leaders out in the world 10 years from now. So those would be my two pieces of advice.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really meaningful and important. And I've seen that play out in a number of colleagues and in myself. You might start with a certain training and certain path, but then if you leave yourself open to have the more of a jungle gym approach than a ladder approach, then that can find different paths that are really fulfilling. Maybe one more question before we move on. The question of ESG goals for companies that they report back to stakeholders, stockholders, other investors. So environmental, social, and governance goals, ESG. So sustainability comes up a lot in those conversations. So I'm curious at Siemens, how is that discussed? Are ESG goals part of the PR mechanism, or is it more wholly integrated within the company? Because I imagine that your division would have a lot to say about that.
Absolutely. And so within Siemens, and this is available online for anybody that's interested in learning more, but we have what's called the degree framework that really does, you mentioned environmental, social, governance. It does take that full 360 approach. I think a lot of times we kind of went through that word cloud of what does sustainability mean, and a lot of it right now for companies that are just starting out on the journey is more on the environmental piece, and it can be in response to regulatory requirements or stakeholder pressure. For Siemens, and I think for companies that you really see on the leading edge of trying to be innovators and role models in this space, it is that 360 view that looks at environmental, not only within our own operations, but how do we work within upstream and downstream to support other companies and other part of that value stream decarbonizing, embodying social equity practices within their businesses, and how can we use our influence to enforce that. We also have a very extensive people strategy that looks to kind of address the social piece of that. From a cultural perspective, it is ingrained in everything we do. It is part of management incentive. And so it really is, I would say it's more internal first. And we do talk about our efforts specifically where we're making commitments on climate, or where we've had breakthrough achievements that we feel are important from a best practice sharing standpoint. But our ESG strategy it really starts internal and works its way out.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to have a focus both within Siemens, but then how you're helping to empower your clients and customers to also fulfill their own ESG goals. Great. Well, I really appreciate your insight. And Siemens has been such a valued partner for Citrus for many years in different parts of the company. So we're really pleased to be able to have you here on the stage with us today for this symposium. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'll stay around if anybody has questions in the chat. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.